What's your I didn't believe in ghost until paranormal story? Story 1. I've posted this before on a similar Ask Reddit question. My grandmother passed away 3 years ago after a long fight with cancer about a month before my wedding. I saw her the day before she passed, but due to work, I wasn't at the hospital the day of and was pretty upset about it. After her funeral, I dreamt I was at my parents' house, but in the dream, it was my friend's house. He was saying to me how there are lots of ghosts in the house, and at that point, there's a knock at the door. There's a lead light window by the door, and I see an outline of a small lady in a purple wool coat, something my grandmother wore before she was admitted to hospital. I walk to the door and open it to see her standing there. I ask her how she is as I unlock the door, and then I wake up. At this point, I am completely shaken. I get up to get some water and just process what I dreamt. After about 20 minutes, I go back to bed, and eventually, after about an hour, fall asleep and begin dreaming from the exact point before I wake up where I unlock the door and see her standing there holding a plate of my favorite food that she would always make whenever I or she visited. I hug her and ask her how she is, and she says she's fine and not to be sad because everything is going to be okay. I tell her that I love her and miss her, give her one last hug, and then I wake up. At that point, I feel happy, but when I try to tell my wife what I dreamed, I completely break down, mostly at the fact that even my dream she brought me a plate of my favorite food. It's hard to explain, but the dream felt extremely real at the point where I saw and spoke to her. Prior to that, when speaking to my friend, it felt like a normal dream. If she did visit me, I'm so glad I got one last chance to say goodbye. Answer: I have had dreams of friends and family that passed, but I've had one visitation dream. My grandparents had a joint funeral. My grandmother died during heart surgery, and 3 days later my grandfather died in his sleep while taking a nap, like the saint he was. I dreamt of them in the garden. My grandmother was sitting in a chair and Grandpop was behind her, with his hand on her shoulder. The reason I think it was them visiting is because there was such love flowing out of them that you could almost see it with sunbeams look in the early morning. It was just so strong and warm and comforting. The feeling was palpable, like I could fill up a jar with it to keep. The love and energy flowing out of them towards me was like no other dream I've ever had. They didn't say anything, but honestly, they didn't have to. I knew what the message was. Story 2. Oh man, my time to shine. So, I used to rent a townhouse in the woods with my ex. One night, I'm out on duty when she calls me at about 3 in the morning. Absolutely hysterical. Him thinking, oh my God, somebody broke in. I gotta race home and help. But it seems that the wooden baby gate we used to keep the puppy downstairs flew from the base of the stairs all the way up the stairs, hit the ceiling, leaving a mark, and landed in a mangled mess. The puppy was locked in her cage all night, so she couldn't have done it, and all the doors and windows were locked from the inside. Later that month, we were in the kitchen, having a chat when, in front of our very eyes, this big, heavy feeder we use for the cat, which was on the countertop as it just cleaned it, rotated 90 degrees upright onto its side, and then gently another 90 so as to be upside down. It barely made a tap as it landed. This feeder was heavy. When I tried to recreate this, it made a very loud crash. How could it rotate with only a tap? More crazy things happened too. I would enter the kitchen and then the silverware drawer would bang. Super loud, the animals would stare at a corner of the room and back away slowly. A deadbolted door would be wide open as soon as you turned your back to it. Oh, And the nightmares, man, you would not believe. So not saying I believe in ghosts, but darn bud. Story 3. Years ago, my husband and I were trying to see if we could get a modest house by contract for deed. We took my sister along to look at the house. It still had someone's personal effects in it, as though they had just stepped out, but was for sale. We walked all through and were hopeful. Suddenly, my sister said, "Wait, I know whose house this was. This house belonged to that guy my son knew who died in his kitchen. This was Tony's house." At that precise moment, a cabinet door shot open and whacked her on the backside. Never one to be rattled easily, she looked up and said, "Okay, Tony, I get it." We checked. It was indeed his house. The cabinet had been tightly shut, and the floor was stable. I've never seen a cabinet door randomly swing open with a force behind it like that. Not enough to hurt, but fast, as though a hand had whipped it open. You had to be there. I wish we could have gotten the house, even if he was haunting it. He was known to be a nice guy, very funny, and we wouldn't have minded sharing it with him. Story 4. When I was in college, I lived in an apartment complex. Every once in a while, at like 2 in the morning, I would hear breaking glass. It was clear as day when it happened. There was no doubt it was a window breaking. Never found any broken glass anywhere around the apartment. My younger brother would come out and party with us, and once or twice he came busting into my room, thinking someone was breaking in. Finally, one night, my girlfriend stayed over. She would kick and push in her sleep, and at some point, nudged me, and I woke up. When I looked over at her, she wasn't asleep. She was sitting at the foot of the bed, facing away from me. When I said her name, she stood up and walked out of the room. Glass break. I looked around and realized that she was still laying next to me in bed. That was the only time I saw anything in that place, but heard the sounds pretty consistently. Story 5. My mom and dad passed just 5 weeks apart of unrelated cancers. We had taken my son with us to my parents' house to feed their cats, which we would go on to adopt. My son was 7 at the time. He wandered downstairs to explore. At some point, he reappeared upstairs, strangely subdued. Now at the time, H hadn't yet learned to lie, nor did he make stuff up. My wife noticed his demeanor and asked, "What's up, kid?" Pop is outside by the fence. I want to go home now." Story 6. It's pretty fudge stupid. The TV would randomly turn on and switch to the news. I'd turn it off and it automatically turned back on after like half a minute and go to the news. I'd switch it to Dr. Phil or Judge Judy or something, and I'd switch back to the news. This happened every night around 20 through 21 for about a month. 5 years later, and I still think a ghost was looking for a place to live. Answer: older electronics and high-energy RF will do this. Was a neighbor of yours into ham radio or anything like that? Live under a power line. Lived near high-voltage switching. Any big neon signs or arc lamps near you? All of that gives off harsh multiband interference that old, unshielded electronics can interpret as, well, whatever, including turning on and changing Chanel. What was probably happening in your case is it was interpreting a channel up or down signal, which would turn the TV on if it was off, and cause the Chanel change. This is classic RF noise behavior. Story 7. When I was in college, I lived in these really old dorms, like hadn't been renovated in over 70 years, and the thermostat looked like the first version of one. We each had our own key card to the place. This is important for later. The doors automatically lock behind you the moment they shut. The bedroom is designed in that cabinets line close to the ceiling of each bedroom. There is also a mirror and a dresser space. Anyways, winter break came around, and I decided to stay back while both of my roommates went home. It was just me and my dog for the next week or so. Both of my roommates went home to other states, so I knew there was no way they would be home at any point earlier than they said they would be. A couple of days into me being alone, I was taking a shower with the bathroom door open. I heard what sounded like a door slam in our dorm room. I peeked my head out the curtain and called out hello, and called my roommates' names. No one answered. I kinda shrugged it off. A couple of nights later, I was getting ready for bed, when again I heard a loud slam from one of my roommates' rooms. I froze, and my dog started going ballistic and she hid under the bed. Mind you, my dog had never hid before and she weighed over 60 pounds. I called out again and even texted my roommate to ask if she had come home. She said she hadn't. Her bedroom door was locked, so I couldn't get in there. I assumed it must have been housing maintenance doing something somewhere in the building. Now that I think back at 9 p.m. at night, honestly, it doesn't make sense, but I wasn't worried about it still. I kind of forgot about the situation until a week later. My roommate came into my room face pale. She asked if I had been in her room. I said there was no way and asked why. She told me to come look. My roommate had fairy lights strung up in her room she never turned off. They had been cut, both in the middle, and were hanging, and the two cabinet doors had fallen off, which was the slam I must have heard that night. They lay on the floor. However, the oddest part was they were stacked one on top of the other, and not underneath the cabinet that was missing them, but to the right of it. It was honestly the most bizarre thing I had ever seen. We asked housing if anyone had been in our apartment during that time frame, and they said no. Ever since that point, I had other weird experiences in that dorm from time to time. My dog got spooked every now and then after that incident during winter break, and I was happy to leave when the time came. Story 8. For context, I believe to this day that the vast majority of not all paranormal videos and photos have a plausible explanation outside of the paranormal. This means that these videos and photos can be easily explained away as either CG, poor quality cameras, pareidolia, or as outright fakes. Needless to say, I do believe that there still can be paranormal shoot that happens. However, at the time when this happened about 8 years ago, and when I didn't believe in ghosts as much, my family and I were staying at the Fort Garry Hotel in Winnipeg, Manitoba. I had a few spare moments and decided to explore the hotel because it is absolutely beautiful. I got lost as I usually do in buildings, since I get directionally challenged the moment I step into one. Anyways, I happened to run into someone that looked like they worked for the hotel, but weren't house cleaning or a clerk, so I was unsure of their position or job. I asked for directions back to the lobby, since I had to meet my family in a few minutes. The moment I arrived in the lobby and walked past the front desk, a clerk and a security guard were staring at me in shock and pale faces. The security guard asked me who I was talking with earlier for the directions back to the lobby. I told him I thought it was someone who worked at the hotel. Well, wouldn't you know, it turns out that floor I was on, I can't remember it for the life of me, has a bunch of paranormal shoot that goes on regularly. I don't know if he was supposed to, but the security guard showed me the footage he had just seen. The person I was talking with never appeared on the security feed, even though they should have been in plain view. It was super creepy because I had shaken this person's hand for some reason, and the footage just showed me shaking hands with the air. The person appeared in front of me as any other person would have. When I touched their hand, it felt like any squishy person would normally, and yet they never showed up on the footage. There was no way I could have blocked out the person from view of the camera, either, as I'm only 5'6". The security guard even pulled up a second angle for further proof. No one else believes me despite the footage. To this day, I still don't know how to explain it. Answer: optical illusion from stress is a decent explanation of this. Your brain knew the directions, but couldn't figure them out because you were busy looking around the hotel and were worried about how to get back to the main lobby. So, your brain comes up with a manifested way to show you how to get back in the form of a clerk. Obviously, it could also be a ghost, who knows? But as someone who doesn't believe in the paranormal, this could have easily been the case. Story 9. I work in a hotel that was built in 1885, so I have plenty of stories. But one that still gives me goosebumps would be the time I was vacuuming. It had randomly stopped while I was halfway through cleaning the room. I thought the plug had fallen out of the socket, so I went to plug it back in, but it wasn't fine. So I checked the vacuum itself and it was switched off by there, but it had been right behind me the whole time. I switched it back on thinking I had just bumped the switch with the hose, but after a few seconds it turned back off again. I went back and forth fighting with whatever. Spirit was there to keep it on, but after about 3 or 4 times I gave up and left the room and went on to the next one where it worked fine and continued to work well for the remainder of the cleans. Whoever was in there obviously thought it was funny to play jokes, as I never felt afraid while in there. And for anyone wondering, I did manage to make it back in there and finish cleaning before more guests arrived. Story 10. When I was 3, my grandfather passed away. I don't really remember him, at all. I know exactly what he looks though, as my grandma still has pictures of him all around her house. And I've seen the home videos of him and myself and my younger sister when she came along, of him playing with us and him lighting my candle at my first birthday, that sort of thing. There is an exception though. For years I've had this random memory that must have occurred only a few months or so before his passing, because I'm pretty sure in this memory I was 3 or very close to it, and my sister was around a year old. I have this very vivid memory of myself sitting at a kitchen bench, and my sister in her high chair, and my granddad playing pop-up behind the kitchen bench. Like he would duck down behind the bench and doing a big pop-up surprise, making a different funny face each time. I was laughing, and my baby sister was doing the typical baby big laughing. It's nothing special in what happened or what went down, but yet it's so strong and vivid. Now, despite how vivid and strong that memory is, I was never sure if it actually happened. Like I said, I was only 3. I barely remember my granddad, and apart from that memory, the only things I really know about him are stories from my mom and grandma, and from the home videos. I could totally be making it up, which is very possible given what we know about memories from young childhood, fading or being twisted in the sense that we misremember or even have completely false memories. Flash forward to last year, when I was pregnant with my first, and my friend group were talking about my family and what do they think baby will look like, etc. I talked about my granddad, how I barely remember him, but I have this one memory. It goes like this, but I'm not sure if it's really real, etc., blah blah blah. That night, after catching up with my friends, I had an incredibly vivid dream. In this dream, the memory was being reenacted. I was watching my granddad pop up and down behind the counter, making funny faces and making me and my sister laugh, as I remember. but after the fifth or sixth time of him doing it, he pops up, but becomes serious and looks directly at me. He tells me that yes, this really did happen. He loved playing this game with us girls. He is happy I remember this, and don't worry, I'm not making a false memory. Everything is all good. I'm not superstitious. While I'm open to the idea of ghosts and the supernatural, there is still a large part of me that is very skeptical, and a part of me does think that dream was just a figment of my subconscious's imagination. But I also do think my granddad came to me in that dream that night to reassure me and confirm that memory was real. Answer: oh, same here. I vividly remember my grandma and grandpa before they passed. I was 2 years old or 3 when my grandpa passed. I don't remember much of him, but my mom has showed me pictures of him, and I have an idea of how he looked like. Fast forward 1 year after his passing, my grandma passes away. I was 4, and I can't tell much about memories. I don't remember much IDKY. I do have this vivid memory of walking into a room and seeing my grandpa sleeping, and a few steps away my grandma sleeping too, though they were wearing black suits. My grandpa had a black suit on as if he was attending a funeral, and my grandma was wearing a black dress. This is the only memory I have of them IDKY, but sometimes I feel it is just a false memory of something that never existed, my mind made. I have had this memory stuck in my head since I was young. IDKY, sometimes it creeps me out, but the fact that I have a memory of my grandma and grandpa kinds of gives me a warmth feeling. Edit out grammar. Story 11. Babysitting my niece when she was 2 years old. The place was a very old house my sister was renting, built in the 1930s. I'm alone in the place with her while my sister is working overnight. It's about 11 p.m., and she's been asleep for a couple of hours at this point. I'm watching TV in the living room and see her running down the dark hallway. Stops just before the entryway to the living room, and I jokingly said, "You better get back to bed or I'm gonna get you," and got up to get her back in bed. I turn the hallway's light on, and her bedroom door is still closed. Weird, so I open it too. Find my niece completely passed out in her bed, drooling and everything. It wasn't my niece I saw in the hallway, so I took her to sleep with me that night. Story 12. When I was around 6 to 7, I was trying to fall asleep this one night, but for whatever reason I just couldn't. So I decided to look around for a brief moment when I saw this white blob-like figure outside of the bedroom's door. It was partially open since I have a cat. Then, the next day, about 6 p.m., I was walking home from the playground with my dad when he got a call announcing my grandma had passed. Since that day, I would continue to see that white figure along with a new one occasionally, a silhouette of a woman in a dress, but with no head. Story 13. When I was 10, me, my mom, and my twin brother were driving in the car. When we were on the main road, the car turned off. The only thing left on was the radio. The radio was playing my uncle's favorite song. He's been dead for almost 8 years now. The car would not turn back on until the song finished. Still a good song, though. Story 14. A couple years ago, I was 23 at the time. I was still living with my parents. I was upstairs in my bedroom, hanging out in my room and watching TV. I was on the phone with my friend at the time, and while I was on the phone, I exited my room and went downstairs to have a cigarette. The only other person in my parents' house that day was my dad, who later I found out was asleep in his room on the main level. Anyway, I was gone for about 7 minutes, and I walked back upstairs and entered my bedroom. I was still on the phone at the time, and I walked towards my bed and sat down. Eventually, after 20 seconds or so, I glanced back up to play my TV, and there, at the end of my bed, was a piece of paper sticking up from the base. I just remember not understanding what I was seeing, and never in my life have I so quickly dropped dead silent. I say dropped dead silent in a way to try and explain what it feels like when you're coming to terms with something your brain isn't ready or fully capable of understanding. I just remember going, "Nate," and he kept saying, what, and I could hardly speak. I quickly said, "He'll call him back," and immediately took out my phone and took a picture. I took a picture. Before doing anything else, before I even studied what the piece of paper was, before I did anything at all, I took a picture. I took a picture because I couldn't believe my eyes. I don't know how it got there, why it was placed the way it was, and why it looked the way it did. I'm getting goosebumps right now. Anyway, it was an old economics paper of mine talking about the government and the divide our two-party system creates in America. I wrote this econ paper 3 years prior in a college intro to econ course. There was originally 2 pages to it, but it was missing its second page. The edges of the page were burnt, and there was a big yellow triangle that almost looked like it was highlighted on, smack dab in the middle of the page. It almost looked luminescent, or like a dollar bill does. Anyhow, it absolutely scared the fudge out of me. That paper had to have been in my closet, stacked away with all my other schoolwork, and now it was ripped from the other page and was placed at the edge of my bed, sticking upright for me to see. I was gone for only 7 minutes. Nobody could have done that. It was absolutely impossible. Shortly after that bizarre situation occurred, I dodged the hell out of my parents' house and went to a